I'm Ricardo with Don Ricardo Foods once again. Today we're going to do grilling tri-tip. I showed you on a different segment how to set up a charcoal grill such as the one that I have, but now we're actually going to get into grilling some tri-tip. So I have one here that I've had for a few minutes. It's set up on the higher tier for slow cooking, and by the time we're done talking about getting your tri-tip seared and putting up on the higher level and such, this will be just about ready to pull off, and I can help you identify how done it is in a sense to medium well, all those different designations for what tri-tip looks like. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and get, as I mentioned in the mixing segment, I like to put my tri-tip in a bag, and if not, get it out of your dish if that's where you decided to marinate it in. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this beautiful large tri-tip on the grill. And as mentioned, this is the side where I have a little bit hotter coals. And we're just going to let it sit there for 5 minutes, give or take, depending on how hot your grill is and such. And I like to use the bag to pour my marinade out on. It may be a little risky for some if they feel the heat's a little too intense for them. It does get a little tricky to get it to the edge and pour it out without pouring out too much. I've done this over the years several times, so I kind of have a little bit of a pretty good touch to it, but there have been times over the years where I still pour out a little too much and almost feel like it's a shame I'm wasting the marinade. Before I close this, I'm going to go ahead and talk about how I choose to use the bag and pour it out. But when you get your tri-tips out, and this is based on up to about 6 pounds of tri-tip. If you're using less than 4.5 pounds, I suggest don't pour the entire contents of the marinade in, maybe 3/4 of it. If it's less than 3 pounds, maybe even just half of the marinade into the bag or the container where you're going to marinate with. But if you choose to use a container, once you have your tri-tips up, or the single tri-tip, whatever you choose, I suggest if you don't want to use the bag, or you weren't using the bag, go ahead and baste it. Put all the marinade pour it out into a container, a bowl, and go ahead and use a basting brush. Now, one thing I do suggest is, you can see there's chunks. Once you put the juices in, there are like chopped onions and stuff that are dehydrated. They come back to life, and they will settle to the bottom. So if you do use a bowl to baste with, I suggest mix it around a little so it brings up some of those bigger chunks before you dip in and baste, so you get some of those nice chunks and everything's really nice and mixed. So I'm going to go ahead and close this for a couple of minutes here. And I do have a smoker box on mine, so I'm going to go ahead and add some more wood chips for this second tri-tip. And if you don't have a smoker, it's no big deal. I just happen to have a smoker on mine. There are many different types of smokers out there. So just follow the instructions for the type of smoker that you have if you happen to have one. And right now, while we're searing one side, I'll talk a little bit about different grills. There's gas grills. If you're going to use a gas grill and it only has one burner, I suggest starting preheating and starting your tri-tip, the searing portion on both sides, at a medium to high heat. You'll know your grill better than I do, and that's where you want to sear the meat. There's people out there that don't believe in searing. I've heard different opinions. I do it because I've been doing it all my life that way, and I'm not going to change what's been working for me. What we do want to take note of also is that we want to get to a certain type of grill mark. We don't want to char the outside, as mentioned in the segment for setting up your grill, too much and have the outside burnt and the inside kind of raw. So as you do this, you'll develop the skill in a sense, because as I mentioned in the other segment also, it is somewhat of an art to grill, especially when it comes to thick meats like tri-tip and those type of roasts and stuff. So with that, it's been a couple of minutes. Let's take a really quick look at what it's looking like here. And I'm going to just lift this one portion. So we see these kind of grill marks. So we're going to let that sit just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is take the time that I need to let that sit a little bit more. I'm going to turn the tri-tip that's been cooking over a little bit one more time. Then again, I'm going to baste that one slightly. That will be coming off soon. And again, I shake my bag up a little bit just so that I can get everything floating and all those flavors nice and mixed. So when I pour, I'll get some of that onto the meat. And like I said, sometimes it can be a little hot. Sometimes my grill's a little hotter because I'm doing several tri-tips at once, and so I have more coals in there. So you do want to be careful when you do that. And the time it's taken to do that, I feel pretty comfortable that I can turn this over to sear the other end. So see those nice grill marks that we have there? Let me go ahead, lay it over. And again, we're going to baste this side a little bit. Then we're going to shut the hood and let it sear on that side. And again, you're going to be real careful not to pour too much. A little bit spills off to the side and goes onto your coals. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to turn off the coals. We'd have to douse it with more than the liquid that's left in the bag here. I know because early stages I've done that a few times and it wouldn't turn off my grill. You just hear it sizzle. So we're going to go ahead and shut again, let some of that heat recirculate. And this is the reason why I like using a covered grill, because we see the heat recirculates. You have a temperature gauge like mine does. You can actually see when it's covered, it goes anywhere between 400 and 500 sometimes, depending how many coals I set in my grill and such. If I'm using my smoker, I notice that a lot of times it gets to 500 pretty quick within a couple of minutes or so. So again, back to talking about some other grills. Some grills, again, gas. If you do have two burners on your gas grill, then you do want to set one side kind of high to sear on, the other side maybe a little lower. And when you're done searing, you go to the lower heat side. If your gas grill doesn't have a cover, you may want to pump up the heat a little bit more depending on your conditions. A lot of this you're just going to have to go by feel, which that's cooking, that's grilling. You'll get better and better at it as you do it more often. For those of you experienced people out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And back to a little bit about the charcoal grills. There are some uncovered charcoal grills that, again, when I talk about in the other segment, you do want to set some coals, extra coals on one side. That's going to be your high heat burning side, and then some on the lower heat burning side. So what happens when the lower heat burning side with the less coals start to kind of burn out, by then your high burning side may be a little cooler because they're burning out. Then you just get a feel for it again, use your best judgment, and start basting and turning your tri-tip over on the other end as the heat goes down a little. Again, this one here, I'll go ahead and open up. We'll talk about adjustments. There are some grills where you can lift, and be careful. You want to use tools or pot holders as such so you don't burn yourself. And if you need to, raise your grates, your charcoal grate up a little bit closer to the meat to get a little bit more higher heat, or just leave it alone. I'm used to doing this. I've never had to move mine in my case, but I've been using this type of grill for many years also. So we're just about, with all that being said, probably ready to pull this up to the higher tier for the rest of the cooking and slow cook. So we'll take another look and again see that. I'm going to go ahead and leave it just a little bit longer. I do want it to get a little bit darker grill marks. Again, we don't want it charcoaled and burnt tips. I mean, little skinny tips are not a big deal. Actually might add some nice smoky flavor to it when you're ready to eat it. But what we don't want is a big black charred bottom evenly across, because then now we've cooked it a little way too much and seared it a little way too long. So this one here, I would say this has been on for about 35 minutes. It's not as big a tri-tip as this one. This one will shrink a little bit. I'm gonna guess this is about 2 pounds a tri-tip here when it started. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull this down off to the side where there's not a whole lot of heat. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut into it to see the doneness. I think it's about medium myself, but I've done this for many years. But for those of you inexperienced and you want to take a quick look, you go ahead and open it up, slice into the middle, and you see that little bit of pinkish that's in there, a little bit of blood kind of coming out. That's medium, as I suspected. I'll go ahead and pull it off in a couple more minutes. That'll be our medium. But even though it's medium, it's actually going to kind of end up medium well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Let me go ahead and get this one up here now. Yep, as I suspected, it's nice and ready to pull up to the higher tier for the rest of the slow cooking process. So every time I move it and turn it over, I always want to baste it a little bit, keep it from drying out. Tri-tip can be a little difficult to grill if you don't do it correctly. And with the tri-tip marinade, Don Ricardo's tri-tip marinade mix, it always seems to come out tender anyway. And part of it, I think, is just simply because the ingredients with the citrus juices and the shot of whiskey, if you decide to use it, I believe helps tenderize it a little bit. So now we're going to go ahead. I'm going to sit the marinade off to the side here because I'm going to go ahead and put the other tri-tip in the dish. Got some nice corn on the cob, nothing to do with it, but yes, we're going to enjoy that with a meal later. I'll turn those over. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. And this is important for tri-tip, and this is what I mean. I'll explain what I'm talking about. Let me shut the grill here and let that continue cooking. So this is important. When we pull the tri-tip off, we do want to go ahead and let it rest for, some people say 15 minutes, others say 10. I think either one is fine. I'm usually good with either, depending on how many I'm doing and what type of help if I have in the process of doing this. And when we let it rest, you want to cover it. And for that next 10-15 minutes, as I mentioned, that you are letting it rest, because it's a thick meat and it just came off the grill, it's got a lot of heat and it continues to kind of cook by itself for a few minutes, believe it or not. And you'll notice it when you slice it, which we will do a segment on slicing if you want to know how to slice tri-tip and more or less the thickness that I find most people have enjoyed over the years. And so when you're letting it sit, back to that, for those 10 to 15 minutes, it is kind of cooking itself. It's resting, and that same heat is still penetrating into the meat, and it's still getting a little bit more done. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what other reason we have for letting the meat rest. Personally, I would like to take it off and chop it up right away and eat it while it's hot, but that's what somebody told me quite some time ago. I've been doing it and it works well. I would suggest, if you are doing quite a few tri-tips, and I've done it in the past, I've done, you know, up to 15, 16, maybe even 20, I've lost count sometimes, and you're going to put in Schaefer's to keep them warm, you may want to do it more like a medium rare, simply because when they're in the Schaefer's that have the steamers, that has heat and that continues to cook the tri-tip. So you may want to cook different levels, maybe make some close to well for people who like it well and set it to one side of the Schaefer, or as I mentioned, do a medium rare so that when people are serving and there's long lines for the Schaefer's and such, it continues to cook, and at the very least, people who like a rare or medium rare will at least like maybe get a medium. So can't satisfy everybody all the time, but hey, we're gonna try it, right? So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and pop this open one more time. We're gonna turn it over so you can get another look. And that's, so you've seen how to start, turn over, pull it up, continue basting. We're going to end here pretty soon because we're going to go ahead and go slice this up. And I didn't want a super long video, so that's why I had one close to done, but I did want to explain a little bit about the coals, a little bit about gas and such. Okay, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so if you were watching, come back and get on the second little clip to finish off the explanation. So anyway, I just turned it over, the tri-tip, where we were slow cooking. I'm gonna go ahead and baste it a little bit more. And as mentioned earlier, before we had some technical difficulties, I do want to baste it pretty much as I can when I turn it over and such. And this one will probably be done here in about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. As you see, we started probably about 10 minutes ago, maybe up to 15, not sure, wasn't really watching the clock. But typically that's what tri-tips will take to cook in this style with charcoal and such, and the way I'm doing it. It could take a little longer. If you have a smoker, follow your smoker's instructions for how long it can take. Those can take hours. But on a charcoal or gas, it's going to take typically between 40 minutes to an hour, depending how big the pieces are and how well you want it done. So that's about it. If you're watching on YouTube, please go to donricardofoods.com for more information, product ordering, more details, more videos that you can link to for more tips and advice on grilling. If you're already on donricardofoods.com, thanks for visiting, thanks for your purchases, and we'll see you on the next segment with whatever we're going to do next. Bye.